I feel like is the most important lesson that I have ever taught. However, I have some hesitation about standing up here before you because there's a lot of you that you've been telling me that you've been listening to my tapes and you've never met me before. And as you can all see, I'm not the tall, luscious blonde that these ladies have visualized me as. However, such as I am, I want to bring a lesson to you. You have some very detailed notes that I would like for you to just to turn over face down, like Doris didn't want you reading along with her. The notes are detailed for you to study at home. I'm going to be talking as fast as I can, racing the clock, and I'm glad for the extra time that I'm going to have this afternoon to say the things that I believe that is important to make this lesson make sense. So I'm going to be talking as fast as I know how and trying to overcome part of my Texas drawl, and I want your attention to what I'm saying. If I cover something too fast, please make a note and ask me about it during the question and answer period so that I can clear up perhaps a misunderstanding or a misconception I have given. I have titled my lesson, The Secret of the Woman of Great Price. And why I call this The Secret is because I've been married 20 years. I've been teaching ladies' classes and studying in detail the ladies' role for 14 years. But what I'm going to talk about today is something that I have only begun to learn within the last 2 years and really crystallized in my mind perhaps within the last 6 months. It's a secret about the woman of great price that has been hidden from me. And there is 2 reasons why this secret was hidden from me. The first reason is because as a young bride, I was too young to understand the very purpose of Proverbs 31, the story of this woman of great price. I did not have enough of life's experiences to even think of some of the things that are suggested in this passage. So first of all, I was too young. I had not experienced enough of life to understand the depth. So the teaching that I have done about the woman of great price in past years, while that truth is basically there through the word definitions, there is a shallowness. There is not the depth that comes with experiences of life. The second reason that I did not know this secret is because no older woman who had experienced more of life and who had an opportunity to have this depth within her did not take me aside and say, "Hey, Patsy, here's something you're missing. You're missing the whole point of what Proverbs 31 is about." And so because no older woman or some wiser person did not come and take me aside and teach me a secret about the woman of great price, to me it has been a secret, something that I haven't known. And because I have not known this secret, it has caused problems within my life, so that within the last 2 years I have experienced what I would call a spiritual crisis, where I had to stop and reevaluate and rethink through some things and discover this secret of the woman of great price. So I want to share with you today what to me has been the most important thing in my life that I have learned. And that has to do with the secret of the woman of great price. And her secret is how she deals with problems. Problems in general, a general attitude towards problems. But if we're going to discover her secret, we have to know something about who she is, because who she is affects the way that she deals with problems. So we're going to meet the woman of great price. I'm going to go over this part of the lesson as we meet her very rapidly because I know all of you are familiar with her. But yet if there's something I need to come back later and emphasize, then please ask me during the question and answer period. In order to understand the woman of great price's secret, we have to know that she is an older woman. She is a woman who has lived through many of the experiences of a woman's life, that of rearing her children, subjecting herself to a husband, raising children through adolescence. She is an older woman. There are 3 ways that we know that she is an older woman. In verse 15 of Proverbs 31, it says that she gives jobs to her daughters. She gives her daughters assignments and taking care of the home, which frees her to go ahead and do the other things for which she is qualified as an older woman. We find that she is married to an elder in verse 23. Now, unless she is the second wife, and these are her stepdaughters, then she has to be an older woman if she has older daughters and an older husband. Then in verse 28, we see that her daughters or her children rise up. This word means to stand up. They have reached an age of where they can draw conclusions for themselves, and they bless her. They say, "It is wonderful to have a mother like this." So we know she is an older woman. But she's not just any older woman. She is a particular kind of an older woman. She is a virtuous woman. And this is what our lesson is going to be about this afternoon, is what is involved in being a virtuous woman. This word virtuous, and I've got this big, long definition here to emphasize one point. She's a strong individual. As you notice, this word means a force, whether of men, means, or other resources, an army, wealth, virtue, valor, strength, able activity, army, soldiers, great forces, host, might, power, strength, strong, valiant. She is strength, but she has the strength of an army. Host, means a great multitude of people. She has the strength of an army. And when you think about what an army does, an army goes out and conquers new lands, conquers foreign soil, and an army protects its own grounds, its own areas of responsibility. She has the strength to go out and conquer new areas, new problems that arise as her family grows, and the strength to protect her own territory, her home. Now, not just saying that she is a strong person is enough. We want to see that her strength comes from her. This is not the description of some woman who accidentally got an extra nice husband, and she had extra nice kids who always made their beds and never sassed her and never did anything wrong. This is a real woman like we are. Her strength came from her. It is something that she did. We can see this in verse 17 in Proverbs, where it says, she girds herself with strength and she makes her arms strong. She puts strength on. This is something she deliberately seeks. Then in verse 25 it says, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. So not only does she have the strength of a soldier, she also has dignity. Dignity means beauty, comeliness, excellence, magnificence. So she's not a person who is beat down by all of this involvement of life, but she has a certain beauty and regalness about her. In Philippians 4 verse 11, Paul says he has learned to be content within whatever circumstances he's in, whether it is good or bad. And we read this description of this woman of great price and we say, boy, that's a great life to have all of these things. Well, by her having these things and these strength, we know that she worked, that she learned these things. Now, another way that we know she developed this strength on her own is because she is a teacher. In verse 26, it says she opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. In Hebrews 5, verse 14, it says people who are teachers are ones who have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. You cannot open your mouth with wisdom in this day and age like Solomon did, where God gave it to him, unless you have been involved in the daily problems of life, exercising your senses, determining what is good and evil. So by the very fact that she can open her mouth in wisdom and have the law of kindness on her mouth, then we know that she is someone who has been actively involved in seeking the strength. Then God tells us that this strength is something that comes from within her, as the description concludes in verse 31, where he says, give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Your King James says, give her the fruit of her hands. What she has as far as being valuable to the community and to her family is something she earned, something she labored for, something she worked for very hard. So, as we look at this woman who is a picture of strength, we need to keep in mind that she is someone whose strength was not given to her as Solomon's strength and wisdom was given to him, but it is something that she worked very hard for. Now, in order to understand her secret, we have to have a picture of this woman in our mind. She is an older woman, a woman who is clothed with dignity. Not only is she an older woman, but if you please, she's a soldier. And if you don't recognize my artwork, that's a red helmet showing that she's fighting the battles that every woman has to battle in her daily life. And not only is she a soldier battling the battles of daily life, she is a particular kind of soldier. She is a successful soldier. Now, those are medals on her chest there. And really, what Proverbs 31 is a list of the battles she has won. Proverbs 31 is not telling us how to keep our house. It's not telling us how to make our husband happy. It's not telling us how to take care of the poor. It is telling us how the woman of great price who won all these battles as she has lived a full life, it is telling us how she won these battles. These are to her credit. These are her fruits and her works that are praising her in the gate. So before us, we have an older woman who has lived life to the fullest, and she has faced it, and she has conquered. And by looking at the way she has conquered life, then we can see some things that we need to be doing. And God, He uses her example to compare her to good women. In verse 29, He compares her to good women. He says, "Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all." This word virtuously, no matter how your translation translates it, whether it's nobly or worthily, is exactly the same word as the word in verse 10 where it says a virtuous woman who can find. Only it is a different form. It is an adverb. And if you remember your English lessons, adverbs modify verbs, and verbs are actions. And what he's saying is you look out over the land of Israel, and there are many women who are fighting the battles that only women have to fight. And they are doing a good job of fighting those battles. But they are in the midst of fighting their battles. They are doing virtuously. But you excellest them all. And why does the woman of great price excel them all? Because she has gone from the battles that you have on the honeymoon and the early days when the babies come and the adolescence of the children. She has gone from those battles. She has mastered those battles, and she is no longer fighting those particular battles. So that in Proverbs verse 10 he says, "A virtuous woman who can find?" And I think we can see why who can find her, because she is a woman who has done these things. The word virtuous here is an adjective. Adjectives modify nouns, and this adjective is modifying this woman. She has become all these things. She is the picture of not a soldier fighting, but a soldier who has fought. And this is why she excelleth them all. And it's also why it's hard to find a woman like this. Because many older women, when you look at their lives, they're still fighting the ABCs of marriage, the ABCs of child rearing, and they haven't gone on to these other things. So God compares her to good women. Then God also compares her to another group of women. He compares her to worldly women in verse 30, where he says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised." Now I have the picture of a bride up here for a reason, and that's because every man, when he marries a woman who has charm and beauty to him, or he's not even going to begin to get romantically interested in her. Every wife on the day of her wedding had charm and beauty for her husband. But oh, charm is so deceitful. You know, here's this girl, she's about to get married, and she thinks he's the most wonderful man there ever was. And you hear these young girls talk, you just get sick of listening to them go on about how wonderful he is. And she gets married, and whether it's 3 hours or 3 days or 3 months after the marriage, she begins to find that this wonderful Prince Charming leaves his socks on the bedroom floor. And he does this and he does that, and all this illusion that she's had is shattered. And the man, he's in the same boat. You know, men have to have reverence. It's just a fact of life. They have to have admiration from their wives. In Ephesians 5:33, God says, "Wives, see to it that you reverence your husband. And to the degree that a wife reverences her husband, to that degree will she have a marriage that truly is what God designed a marriage to be." So men have to have this. Here's this poor man who walked this girl up the aisle, and she thought that he was the most wonderful man that ever walked the face of the earth. And here she's starting to nag and complain and gripe, and she's sour in the morning and she's sour in the afternoon. And oh, his charm deceitful. Here it is, you thought you were getting this, but you didn't. And same thing with beauty. You know, when you're young, you think, oh, I'll never have ugly, crippled up fingers with arthritis, and I'll never have eyebrows that go all over the place like they do as your hormones change. And you think, oh, I'll never do this and I'll never do that. And you can fight those things and you can camouflage those things, but the days are going to come when we can't fight and we can't camouflage, and we are a truly older individual. So beauty's vain. That's not dependable to place the happiness of your marriage. Society says we're not getting older, you're getting better. Well, that's true up to a point, and then you start getting older anyways. But the woman of great price, notice what she placed her confidence in on her wedding day. It says, she is one who fears the Lord. She placed her confidence in patterning her marriage after God's Word. And I have down here, she's getting older, but she's also getting better. And looking at Proverbs 31, we see the effect of a lifetime spent fearing the Lord. And a lifetime spent in fearing the Lord does make one more precious than gold. So here it is that God has introduced the woman of great price to us. We've seen that she is an older woman, that she is a soldier, and now what we want to do, as we look at her as a virtuous woman, we want to see how it is that we can put on virtue, to discover her secret for dealing with the problems of life. So as we put on virtue, the most important part, I think, of virtue is that we need to expect to have problems in this life. That we need to expect to have problems as the proof of our faith. I have down here 1 Peter 1, verses 6 through 7. And I'm not going to read this whole verse because you can see it. I'm just going to read it enough to emphasize the things I have highlighted here. In 1 Peter 1, verses 6 through 7, it says, "In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials." Now, the problems we have in life are distressing at the time. They're not fun. We don't wake up in the morning and say, "Oh boy, I wonder what's going to happen to me today that's going to be a problem." So God recognizes that problems are a distress. But notice that He says, "In this you greatly rejoice." The woman of great price knew how to rejoice, because strength and dignity was her clothing, and she laughed at the future. And this is what I had to learn. I had to learn, how do you laugh at the future? How do you rejoice in problems? So that's what we're going to be talking about, how to rejoice in problems. But we also want to notice that God uses the word various trials here. Life is full of all sorts and all kinds and all sizes of trials, of tests. And a lot of times it's the little tests that get us down because we don't even recognize them as a test, an opportunity. We snap at our husband or we snap at our kids, and we don't recognize that as a test of our character and of our faith. And so our trials are for the purpose of proving our faith. Just like Satan attacked Job in the book of Job, and he told God, he says, he says, "Job serves you for hire. He's only your servant because you give him all these lands and all these children, and he's got such a wonderful home and all this wealth. Satan serves you for hire." And so Job serves you for hire. So God allowed Satan to test Job to find out whether his faith was because he really loved God and he really wanted to serve God, or if it was only for the good things that God does to him. And that's the way it is with our lives. The little things and the big things and the all sorts of bad things that happen to us are tests of our faith, to see if we're serving God for hire or if we're only serving Him because life is going the way we want it to. So if we're going to be like the woman of great price, then we need to be a soldier who's ready to fight, not surprised whenever war comes, be trained, willing, and confident that we can deal with the battle that lays before us. Now, in order to emphasize that all life is, or a big part of life rather, is a series of problems, I've got a chart up here about some of the problems that happen to men and women. Have on the first chart here, or the first column, is problems that are common to man. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, God says that He is faithful and He will not allow us to suffer beyond what we can bear, and that the problems that we have are common to man. And here's a list of problems that are common to mankind. Anybody that's married knows that whenever you enter the marriage relationship and you take a man who has one set of ideas and needs and goals and you place him with a woman who has another set of ideas and needs and goals, you're going to have problems. Problems that need to be worked out in that marriage. Then there's problems with subjection and leadership, problems of sexual adjustment, problems with in-laws, problems with parents. You get all of these things up here taken care of, and along comes the baby. And you got to start right back over again. You got to start back up here with subjection and leadership. May have sexual problems. You may have parent and in-law problems that you never thought of before. Now, having the first baby is not the end of your problems. You have the second one, things change again. And I've got baby here because every time you have one, it's different. One couple said they'd had 3 kids, and they said, "We've got babies figured out. We've got them down pat, and we're so excited about this 4th baby." That 4th baby came along and broke all the rules, and they had to start all over again, finding out, adjusting to problems. Problems with adolescence, with children. Proverbs says that foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child and that the rod drives it from him. Parents put a lot of time and energy into driving that foolishness from the heart of their children, and problems are caused by it. There's problems with school and peer pressures, problems with job changes, financial problems, house changes, grandchildren, retirement. Now I heard some poor lady say she was really looking forward today to when it's just her and her husband. She doesn't know what she's in for. The retirement years can be some of the most miserable years that a husband and wife ever have, because here's this wife who's been all 40 years married, cleaning the house, taken care of, and all of a sudden he's retired and he's following her around. She can't wash dishes. She doesn't know how to make the bed. Why, she can't run the vacuum cleaner right. And lots of retired women are absolutely miserable because of the adjustments that they need to make during this period of time. Then there's health problems, and I could have had health problems all the way up in here. Death could be anywhere up in here. So just being a human who's eating, breathing, and reproducing means you're going to have problems in this life. Now, this is what it means to be part of humanity. But if you're a Christian, a whole new door of problems is open to you. And here's just a few of them. In Matthew 10, verse 34, Jesus said, "You think I came to bring peace. I came to bring a sword." It's going to be mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, father against son. It's going to be the own members of your family that cause you problems. So there's all kinds of spiritual problems with relatives. Then there's all kinds of problems, of spiritual problems with brethren. The whole book of 1 Corinthians just gives you a few ideas of all the jealousy and rivalry and the things that went on within that church. Then, in 1 Peter 3, verses 16 through 17, Peter tells us not to be surprised if we're slandered and reviled, but to keep a good conscience so that when we are, then we can answer that. You know, anybody who is very active in the Lord's work, if they are actively involved with other people, there is going to be a time, at least one probably, and if they're lucky it'll only be one, of when they are slandered and reviled, because it is impossible to please everyone. Jesus couldn't do this, and who are we to think that we can live our life in such a way, no matter how hard we try, that we can please everyone? So this is something that's going to happen. Bearing one another's burdens, being an older woman, being the teacher of the young, and as Doris was talking about this morning, just doing what God says in Galatians 6:1 can cause problems. Now, it's not our problems, but when somebody comes along and shares their problems with us, it does create a problem for us that we have to deal with in a different way. Then there are problems of persecutions from without. In Hebrews 10, verses 32 through 34, it talked about how people had their property taken away from them, and they were publicly ridiculed. So this just gives us a little bit of an idea of the problems that a Christian suffers. Now, if we wanted to get into the problems of people who don't have Christ in their life, then this picture, the problems that are common to man are a whole lot worse than the ones that Christians suffer. And then their problems of the consequences of their sin are a whole lot worse than the problems that we suffer as we try to serve God. So as we look at this picture, the thing that I am trying to emphasize is that we need to accept the fact that life has a lot of problems in it. There are good times, and there are fun times, and there are wonderful times, but there are many, many, many times of problems. And so we need to accept this. And as we accept this, we need to not be like humanity does and says, "Why me, Lord? Why is it my baby's born with birth defects? Why is it my child has a problem with peer pressure and with drugs? Why me, Lord?" You know, that's what humanity says. Why me? It's not fair. Here, I'm trying to obey you as hard as I know how, and it's not fair that this is happening to me. I didn't deserve this. Well, instead of asking, why me, what we should ask is, why not me? We look out into humanity and we see all these other babies being born with defects. Why not me? Why not my baby? We look out and we see all these children who have learning disabilities. Why not me and my son that we have to work on this problem? We look out and we see all these drunk drivers killing all these people on the highways and say, why not me, Lord? Why not my son, my daughter, my husband? Why not me? This is something that is happening to humanity, and for us to think that because we are Christians, we're living in a bubble where we are protected from humanity, then this is not stop being realistic. We need to accept that life is good, but it is also full of many, many problems. And we need to ask ourselves, what is our attitude towards these problems? Because really, it's not all these problems that cause us the problems. What causes us all of our problems is our attitudes towards problems. And when problems come up, we have a choice about what our attitude is. We can choose to be like this man, simply reacting to life. I don't have to put up with this, and just reacting to problems. Well, a woman of great price did not react to problems. She was someone who her clothing was strength and dignity, and she was able to laugh at the future. Let come what may, I have what it takes to deal with that problem. So, not only should we expect to have problems, we should also expect to be able to solve our problems through faith, through using God's Word. In 1 Timothy 4, verse 5, he says that marriage, which is the realm that this woman of great price is dealing with, that marriage is sanctified, that our marriage is set apart from the common marriages of the world 2 ways. First is through the Word of God. By going to God's Word and finding His solution to our problem, then going to God in prayer. The word prayer here is not our common word for prayer, but it means to have an interview. To go to God in an interview where we lay ourselves bare before Him and say, God, this is the person I really am. I see these flaws within myself, and help me take care of these flaws. So we expect to solve our problems through learning what God wants us to do and then putting His will into our lives. And what I want to do now is to share with you some things that I have learned the hard way about dealing with problems in general. First of all, as we're going to deal with our problems, we need to solve our problems quickly. The human body was not made to withstand problem upon unsolved problem upon unsolved problem that drag on for weeks and months and years. That's not God's way. God's way is to solve problems quickly and get them out of the way and go on to something else. In Ephesians 4, verse 25 through 27, it's a passage you're all familiar with. Let not the sun go down on your wrath. Some problems need to be solved in less than 24 hours. In Ecclesiastes 8, verse 11, he says that the heart of the evildoer is given over to doing evil simply because punishment is not executed speedily. So God's way is that problems are to be solved quickly. But as we go about solving our problems quickly, we need to realize that some problems don't have an answer as far as being done away with. There are some problems that we're going to have to learn how to accept and to endure as a part of our life. I have the example of Paul's thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians 12, and starting in verse 7. Paul prayed to God for 3 times for this thorn to be removed. And God told him, no, my grace is sufficient for you. And Paul said, God gave me this problem so that I would not be too proud as I preach the gospel to others and become a very proud and boastful person. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, it's a verse we all like to quote, how God will not allow us to be suffered beyond what we can bear, but will with the temptation provide a way of escape. And it says, and also that we may endure. God intends for us to escape some problems by solving them quickly and getting rid of them. Other problems He intends for us to simply learn how to endure. Now, as we go on looking at ways we can solve problems, one thing we need to do is learn when to say no. And this is something that I think is a fault in a lot of people's lives who are very actively working for the Lord, is not knowing when to say no. This is something that my husband and I have learned the hard way, and we can look back and see damage that we have done to ourselves by not knowing when to say no. In Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, Jesus gives a parable that all of you are familiar with about the 10 virgins. 5 were wise and 5 were foolish, and they all took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. But halfway there, they all ran out of oil. The 5 wise virgins had been wise enough to take along an extra container of oil. And the 5 foolish said, give us some of your oil so that we can get there too. Now, if I'd been one of those 5 wise virgins who had been smart enough to bring along an extra container of oil, and here's this person asked me, give me some of your oil so I'll have enough, you know what I would have done? not only would I have given that person part of my oil, but I would have given the 4 other foolish virgins. I would have split it up 6 ways. And when Jesus told that story, it would have been about the 4 wise virgins and the 6 foolish virgins. Now that's what I would have done, and I've done it before, so see, I know that that's what I would do. But yet, you know what those wise virgins said? They said, no, lest we not have enough for ourselves, and we not get to go meet the bridegroom. And then they said, it was your responsibility. It's your responsibility to get your oil. You go get your own oil. You assume your proper responsibilities. And of course, you know the story that the 5 foolish did not have enough time left then to go and get their oil. You know, there's many times in our lives as Christians when we're serving God, when people make unreasonable demands upon our time and upon our resources. And I have up here, don't take false guilt trips. Now, I could just teach a whole lesson on false guilt trips because I've taken plenty and I've helped my husband take plenty. And false guilt trips, you know, that is us laying something on ourselves that we are not able to bear. That's not God giving us a temptation beyond what we can bear. That is us creating a problem for ourselves that we are not able to bear. And you look at this woman of great price, she had a balanced life. Her life was not all church, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Her life was not all family, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Her life was not all running around taking care of the poor and the needy, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Her life was not all devoted to taking care of her home and her appearance. She had a balanced life. Study the woman of great price so that we can have a balanced life as she did. Then another thing that we need to do in order to solve our problems is we need to learn when to take time out. In Matthew 6 verses 31 through 32 is an account of where Jesus and the apostles were busy teaching the people. And the people so pressed upon them that they didn't even have time to eat. Has it ever been like that in your house? Where you never get down to sit down at the table together and eat without the phone ringing? Just to get to have a meal together would really be a treat. Well, this is what the apostles were doing. Here's all these people. Have you ever felt guilty about taking a vacation you needed? Because here's all these people, here's all this work that needs to be done. This is the situation that the apostles were in. Here are all the people all around them wanting to learn and needing their attention. And you know what Jesus said? Jesus said, go away. Get away from these people. Go rest for a little while. And so Jesus recognized the needs of the human body, and he told them that they needed to rest for a little while. In Ecclesiastes 4 verses 4 through 6, here it is, the writer contrasts the workaholic who's busy out just work, and how that's just vanity and striving after winds. He contrasts him with the lazy person who doesn't do anything, that's vanity and striving after wind. But you know what he says is the best way to be? Have one fist full of labor and one fist full of rest. That this is what man needs to do. He needs to take care of his own body. Now, as we continue to look at ways that we can solve problems, another area of dealing with problems is bearing one another's burdens. In Galatians 6 verse 1, we're commanded to bear one another's burdens. But I want to approach this in 2 different ways. One, as when we have a problem, how to let somebody bear our problem. And that I have down here that personal pride is the most useless thing there is when it comes to solving personal problems. In Proverbs 16 verse 18, he says, pride goeth before a fall. I learned this lesson from a girl that I taught on a private basis. She would come to my house, and we would sit down and go over my class lesson material, and I was teaching it to her on a private basis, just exactly like I would do in a public way, going over the same material. And as we went over the part about how important that the meal time was, and that this is something that is important to men, this girl spoke right up, and she said, well, before I tell you what she said, I want to tell you about her husband. Her husband was not a Christian. He made about 1/3 of the income that she did working in a pornographic bookstore. And he would come home and tell her about how he had went over to this friend's house who was laying in bed with a woman that he wasn't married to, and her husband would sit at the foot of the bed and visit with them. So this is the kind of husband she had. And so she had some legitimate complaints and some legitimate gripes. But whenever I brought up the part about the meals, how this is important, she spoke right up. And she says, you know, I really treat my husband bad about meals. I just fix the dinner and I put my own dinner on my plate and on a TV tray, and I take it and sit down in front of the TV, and he has to go in there and fix his own dinner and put his dinner on his own TV tray and take his own TV tray in the living room. Now, she told me that. Now, you know, if that'd been me, I might have thought, yeah, I need to work on this, but boy, I wouldn't have said anything to that person for anything. I want them to think I'm better than I really am. I want to fool them a little bit. But because she was honest and really laid her burden on me, then I was able to make comments to her that pertain to her particular situation and help her overcome this particular fault. This girl's husband, this has been several years ago. He has changed jobs, has a respectable job. One of her complaints was the biological clock is ticking and she wanted children and he didn't. He's completely changed his attitude and they have a baby that he just adores. And their whole home life has changed because she recognized her problems and she worked on herself. And she was was letting me help her bear her burden by being honest with her. So if we have a problem and we want some help, then we need to be honest with the person that we seek the help from and not paint ourselves better than we really are. Now, on the other side of the coin, if we're the person that the person comes to, then I'd like to caution that we be careful that we don't become an emotional garbage dump. Someone that people can just heap garbage upon garbage upon garbage into our minds that does nothing but depress and weigh us down. Now, I learned this lesson a hard way. We had in Amarillo, a lady called up and she says, you don't know me and I don't know you, but I've read, she's talking to my husband, she says, I've read Patsy's book and I've got a problem I'd like to come talk to you about. I'm here in town. She's a lady from out of town. And so he made an appointment with her at 1 o'clock. So at 1 o'clock, she shows up promptly on time and she sits down and we say, okay, what's your problem? What can we do for you? And this lady talked from 1 o'clock till 5:30, and we had no idea what her problem was. Now, she was telling us all the garbage about how she had met him and what went on and how crummy his folks were and how his brother had killed his wife and he's in the penitentiary, and I got enough material that I could write the Dallas series for a year. Now, I'm not kidding you. Just all this garbage. Now, I wasn't sitting there passively just listening to her. I'd interrupt her. I interrupted that lady 3 times, and I said, I still have no idea why you're here. Would you please just tell me what the problem is? Oh, I'm getting to it. And I'd listen a little while longer, and I still didn't know. Finally, at 5:30, we said, look, we have worship services tonight, and we need to have supper, and we need to get ready to take care of our responsibilities, and we can only give you 30 more minutes. Well, guess what? We found out what her problem was in about 3 minutes. She had a very complicated marriage problem that we had the ability and the resources to help her with. But out of 5 hours, we had 30 minutes to help that lady. And as far as I know, is not out of her situation. We loaded her down with tapes and sent her off and said, you're going to have to do some studying and some things for yourself, and have never heard from her since. And after that lady left, I thought about this, and I thought, boy, you know what I was? I was an emotional garbage dump. I was letting her just fill my mind full of all this garbage. You know, we're concerned about television, what television puts in our mind. But boy, some of the things our brethren can put in our minds is something that's really not pleasant to have there. In Proverbs 4, verse 23, God says, guard your mind, because from it come the springs of life. And so I made a promise to myself that the next time something like this happens, I'm going to be a little bit more forceful and say, look, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't be a garbage dump, an emotional garbage dump. And so if you want to tell me what your problem is, then if I need to know all of these gory details back here in order to help you, which usually you don't, and if I need to know these things, I'll ask you and you can fill in the details. And so we need to be careful that we're not an emotional garbage dump, that we don't just listen to things all under the guise of helping someone that's not helping them really, because in James 3, verse 6, here it is, James says that that the tongue is a fire, and that it sets on fire the course of life. And we're not helping someone by just listening to them to hash over and rehash problems. We are helping that person stir up their emotions and to get their emotions worked up. And so we're really doing that person a disservice. So we need to be careful in the way that we help other people bear their burdens. Then I have down here another way that we need to work with our problems is that we need to give other people the right to make their own choices. God gives all of us the right to make our choices, and we need to give that same right to other individuals. In John 4 verse 24 it says that God is a spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in truth and in spirit. Many times we are so busy forcing the truth upon somebody and trying to get their actions in line that we don't take into account their spirit, their willingness to serve God. And so we need to recognize that their actions without the right attitude don't really mean anything. And so we need to recognize that and give them the right to make their own choices, like Jesus did. When you study Jesus' life, He laid the facts out for people. This is what it's like. This is what it's going to be like if you serve me. This is what it's going to be like if you don't. And then you know what Jesus did? He shut up. And He let them make their own choices. And if they made the wrong choice, He grieved. He hurt for that person. But He allowed them to make their own choice. Then, as we look at ways to solve our problems, I want to suggest to you that we need to learn how to possess the book of Job. Now, I have set in I don't know how many good series of classes on the book of Job. I've got fantastic notes in my Bible on the book of Job. I understand the outline of the book of Job, but I don't possess the book of Job. And so this point up here is for my benefit as well as for yours. And I want to tell you what I mean by possessing the book of Job. Think about the book of Job strictly as a piece of literature. Leave inspiration out for a minute. If you wanted to sit down as literary critics and study the book of Job, think about it in that way. The book of Job, first of all, is written in a poetic form. It's poetry. And poetry is one of the most active ways that you can write to captivate people's emotions. And so it's written in a way, the very form, to appeal to our emotions and captivate them. Next, it's written in dialogue. If you want to make your stories that you write or your Bible classes that you write, if you want to make them more appealing and captivative to the person that you're writing to, then use dialogue. The more dialogue you use, the more vitality and action you bring to your writing, and the more you appeal to the emotion of your readers. Except for a little bit of narration in the front of the book of Job, it is almost entirely narration. You have Job's exact words when he was in the depth of depression. You have the exact words of his friends who came along to help him and only ended up depressing him more. You have Job's words of anguish of where he began to blame God. And then you have the exact words of Elihu that came along and said, I'm a young man and I've been listening to you older men because you should have wisdom. And I'm very angry because you don't have wisdom and you're saying things that aren't true. Job was shooting his mouth off in ways that, although he hadn't sinned before the book of Job, he did sin in the way he reacted to his problem. And so Elihu came along and showed him this, and we have Elihu's exact words. Now, so dialogue is very active, and as we read it, we can see Job's feelings. Not only that, if you just study the book of Job from a literary point of view, that book is full of active verbs. If you want to appeal to the emotions of your readers, then get rid of your is's and your was's and all forms of the verb to be and put action in your writing. The book of Job is used in books about writing because it is such a perfect example of active verbs. And so here it is, God has inspired a book dealing with suffering where our emotions get in the way and we get to thinking things we shouldn't think because we're emotionally involved. God has inspired the one book that deals with that in detail to be written in such a way as to possess and captivate our emotions. And if we're going to possess the book of Job, then we're going to have to do with it what I have done, and I think some of you women have done with the Song of Solomon, where we have read it and read it and read it. Customs we didn't know about, we looked them up, we looked up words. We know the Song of Solomon backwards and forwards. Something happens and we say, oh, that's like the Shulamite. Or something else happens and our mind automatically, oh, that's like the shepherd. The Song of Solomon belongs to us, and it also was written in poetry. It's all dialogue. There's not one word of narration at all in the Song of Solomon. It's all active verbs, and not only that, it was written as a play. How more active and emotionally involving can you get than that? And God designed the Song of Solomon to captivate our emotions in the realm of romance, and a lot of us have experienced that. But because we haven't possessed the book of Job. You know, the book of Job is the oldest book scholars believe that is written in our Bible. And it was probably around when the woman of great price, when this description of her was written. She had access to the book of Job and to the help that it will give us in dealing with our problems. So if we're going to be like her and be able to deal with our problems and laugh at the future, then we need to possess the book of Job. Then, not only do we need to possess the book of Job and be able to expect to have problems, not only expect to have problems, but expect to solve problems. Now comes the part about rejoicing in our problems, counting it all joy, is we need to expect to benefit from our problems, to reap benefits from our problems. Romans 8:28 is a verse all of you are familiar with about how all things work together for good to those that love the Lord. And so up here I have just a few benefits that we reap from problems after they're over. One of them is meaningful relationships. In Proverbs 9 verses 8 through 9 it says, "Correct a wise man and he will love you. Correct a wise man and he will be yet wiser." The way to have truly meaningful, deep, wonderful relationships with other people is to solve problems together. Work on problems together. And you know this woman of great price, it said the heart of her husband trusts in her. And women who have been married for many years and have a husband whose heart trusts in them, they know that trust came about through them working on problems together, solving problems together, learning the depth of that other person's commitment to God and commitment to doing what is right. And so if we want to have meaningful relationships, it's not like these people who say, "Oh, I don't want to get married. I just want to live with this fella so that as soon as the first problem comes up, we can split and he can go his way and I can go my way and we'll have true happiness." I want meaningful relationships. Well, if you want to have meaningful relationships, then you make that commitment and you accept the problems that life dishes out and you solve them together so that you can. Solving problems together makes us mature. In James 1 verses 2 through 4, and I'll turn over there and read that for you real quickly. James tells us how it is that we're to deal with our problems. I can even find James in my Bible here. Okay, in James verses 1, 2 through 4, he says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking in nothing." So the effect of dealing with our daily problems is that it purifies us, it makes us grow up and become a more mature individual. And once we do that, then we can do the very thing for which we were created. In Isaiah 43 verse 7, God said, "Everything that I have created for my glory." And when we solve our problems and serve God, not because life is easy, not because everything is happening the way we want it to, but because we love God and we want to live with Him, then we truly glorify Him. And I would like to ask you to ask yourself a question that I asked myself. And when I asked myself this question and answered it truthfully, it made a big difference in my life. The question I asked myself is, what would I be like today if I had not had some of the serious marriage problems that I've had and conquered them, and faced some of the church problems that I have and conquered them? What would I be like today? Now, I'll tell you what I think I would be like today. I've just recently celebrated my 20th wedding anniversary. And so after 20 years of marriage, what I would be like today if I hadn't had these problems and solved them is that my husband and I would probably be living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He would probably be working for Honeywell up there. He wouldn't be a preacher. And I would be the most worldly-minded person you ever saw. There's doubt in my mind if I would even still be a Christian today. But even if I was still a Christian, I would be the most worldly-minded, worthless person who had the biggest, fanciest house you ever saw, had my whole life revolved probably around my kids and my RV. That'd be me. and I wouldn't even be worth spitting at, let alone walking across the street to meet. And so once I asked myself that question, and I answered it honestly, knowing me as only I can know me, that made me realize, yes, I can count it all joy that I've had these problems that at the time I resented and thought it's not fair, and why me, I don't deserve this. And I can look back on them and say, thank you, God, that these things happened. Now, as we see that the woman of great price was one who dealt with problems, we want to just bring our lesson home a little bit closer to the woman of great price. And notice the test that she passed as she lived the life of a woman, and how that many older women today fail these tests. And it's because older women fail these tests today that it is hard to find a woman like this. And I'm just going to read through these without much comment. She's passed the test of subjection, whereas other older women are still contentious. She's passed the test of admiring her husband, whereas other older women are resentful and bitter towards the man they've lived with all these years. She's passed the test of love of money, where other older women many times are either worldly or else they're miserly in the way they deal with their money. She's passed the test of parenting, whereas others are disgraced. She's passed the test of keeping the home, whereas many older women, you walk through their house and here's 40 years of accumulation piled up everywhere. They're overwhelmed with taking care of their home. She's passed the test of her self-image, whereas others are depressed. She's passed the test of how to deal with the poor, whereas others are self-centered. She's passed the test of how it is she should dress, whereas there are other older women who are either sloppy in their appearance or they're trying to hang on to youth and they're youth-seeking. She's passed the test of her husband's spiritual potential as he serves as an elder. But there are many, many other men who are not qualified to be an elder or a deacon because of the way their wife takes care of the home. Then she's passed the test of feminism, her attitude towards herself as a woman in the role of a woman, whereas other women are feminist. She's passed the test of her attitudes towards life. She's able to laugh at the future, whereas other older women are cynical and bitter. She's passed the test of her tongue, of controlling it, whereas other older women are gossips. She's passed the test of being a teacher of younger women, whereas other older women, they can't be approached because of their attitudes or their lack of knowledge. She's passed the test of what's going to happen to her faith. Her faith is stronger. A woman who started out trusting in the Lord and she's still firmly there planted, whereas many older women have weak faith. You try to approach them, let's do this, let's do that. Oh no, that won't work. You'll grow up one of these days and see. So she's passed this test of faith. Then basically what she is a problem solver, whereas many, many, many older women are such problem causers, not only to their husbands, but to their extended families of their married children. And so truly the woman of great price has won many battles. And so we can see that truly her works and fruits do praise her in the gates. And as I conclude our lesson, I want us to see that we have a choice to make. And our choice is that if we are a young woman, we need to realize that we still have a lot of life ahead of us and the problems that are going to be common to us as women. And we need to be like those good women described in Proverbs 31. We need to be doing virtuously. We need to have the strength of accepting the problems of life and solving them and letting them make us be better individuals like this woman of great price. So we need to look in the mirror and examine ourselves. What kind of older woman am I going to be? Am I going to be like the woman of great price? Or am I going to be like the woman who has failed the problems of life? Then, if we're an older woman, we also have a choice to make. And the choice that we have to make is that we also need to look in the mirror and to see what kind of person we are. Are we the virtuous woman of Proverbs 31? The woman who has faced life squarely, said, and tackled the problems as they have come and solved them to make herself be a stronger individual? Or are we someone who, instead of having a breast full of medals, we have, the misconduct, whatever, well, you know what I'm trying to say. But anyway, she's a disgracefully discharged, however it is I'm trying to say that. But anyway, as older women, we need to look, am I like the woman of great price? If we're not, as long as there's life within us, it's not too late to take hold of life's problems and to solve them and to accept the challenges that God has brought to us. Okay, this concludes the lesson that I have for you, and I appreciate your courteous attention. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask me? Okay, her question is that in Proverbs 31, where it talks about the older woman, okay, in verse 15 it says, she rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. If you look up that word maidens, you find that this means a girl from infancy to adolescence, and there's no idea of a servant or anything at all within that word. The word portions there means appointment, assignments, to play the part of a foreman. She gets up early in the morning, and this is part of her way of solving problems, is she expects her daughters to work, and she teaches her daughters, like Doris was talking earlier, that mothers are to teach their daughters. This woman of great price is teaching her daughters how to take care of the home, and her daughters do a lot of the running of that home, and that is partly of why she is free then to have the time to be teaching and taking care of the poor and doing things like this. Did that answer your question? Okay, someone else have a question? Okay, her question, for those of you who may not have heard it, is about giving people the right to make choices. What about someone who has a 17-year-old who doesn't want to attend worship services and the father says, you have to go? Do you give that child a choice? Well, in giving people the right to make choices, you give them the right to make the choices that God gave them to make. And parents have certain obligations to God in the way that they deal with their children and being over their children. The father is to discipline his children in a way that he is not to discipline his wife. He's to put his children in subjection to him, whereas his wife is responsible for putting herself in subjection to her husband. That's her responsibility. And so the father who says you need to do this, well then there's lots of circumstances around that I can't give just a blanket answer, yes he should do this or yes he shouldn't do that. But he does have the authority and the responsibility of a father, and he's going to have to use some wisdom and some insight in dealing with that particular child. But yet, one word that we use around our house a lot is that was your responsibility to do that. We use that word all the time, hoping that one of these days it's going to come back to us in a proper way. That was your responsibility. If she does something that was her responsibility, or fails to do something, and here's the consequences. We don't bail her out of mistakes that she's made. You need to accept the consequences of your responsibility and start trying to teach early, accepting personal responsibility. This is my responsibility to take care of this. This is yours to do that. And you either reap the benefits from doing it or you reap the consequences for not doing it. Okay, someone else have a question? I've been getting one question over and over since I have been here, and I just felt sure someone would raise their hand. Pardon?
So go ahead and give us the question again.
Okay, several people have asked me, where's my second book? And I said I was tempted not to come today because of that question. Where my second book is that when I finished the first one, I visualized the second one being out within a very short time. And I tried to get, the second one is called Learning to Love, and I tried to get some permission to use, to quote some material that was in a book that was originally written in German and translated into English. It was a history of sexual customs. And I felt like that this material was real important so that I didn't have to present myself as a know-it-all authority, but I could quote history and use some examples that we could all depend on. When I wrote, I've used lots of things with permission, but when I wrote for permission to use this material, and there was a lot of it that I wanted to use, I was denied permission to use it. So what I've had to do is I've had to go back and check this man's references and read his sources and dig this material out for myself. And that slowed down the momentum of what I was involved in doing. Then we moved, and then we got a child, and life has been really too complicated for me to finish this like I've wanted to. But it has been on my mind. And I feel like that the delay has been a good delay, because while we were in Texas, I joined a writer's club, and I learned some techniques of writing that I think have really improved my writing. I've entered some contests with some of my material from the second book and have placed in some of them. Then I think this will help me in getting a publisher. And I feel that this delay, although I don't enjoy people asking me, where's your second book, and having to tell them that this delay I feel like is a profitable one. My husband right now is in the process of shopping for a word processor, because I'm one of these people that there's too many corrections, and so it's something that I'm looking forward to having that to work with. So I'm not going to make any promises about a date, but it's still there, and you can nag me every once in a while about it. So the whole series is called Marriage, A Taste of Heaven. The first volume is Appreciating Marriage. And if I just left part 1, Appreciating Marriage, off, well, then people wouldn't be asking me where part 2 is. So it's the first part has to do with the purpose of the creation. It has a verse-by-verse discussion of the Song of Solomon. In it, it has a chapter on subjection, and that chapter I had completely written at one time, and several older ladies came and said, "We hate everything you're saying about subjection." And I sat down and looked at it and completely redid the outline to show the men's part of it to answer their objections. So that was a time when I felt like somebody's criticism and a problem helped me do a better job than I would have ever done just by myself. And I might tell you a little bit about this calligraphy. This is a calligraphy of Proverbs 31. And my mother paid an artist to do this calligraphy. And my mother's original calligraphy is great big. It's like this, and she has it framed in a gold frame in her living room. And if there's anything I covet of my mother's, it's that picture of Proverbs 31. But my mother paid a printer to have him reduce that calligraphy and print it on parchment paper, and that's what these are. And I brought mine up here so you can see how I framed it. And I have mine framed, and I keep it in my bedroom, and I probably stop and read it 2 or 3 times a week when I'm in my bedroom making the bed or something like that. And I think that, and I feel like that it's through all the reading, continually reading of it, that it finally dawned on me what Proverbs 31 is about. And so the Jews, God told them to put the scriptures on the doorposts of their homes to remind them, and I think there is some value in having the scriptures where we continually see them and read them. I certainly do appreciate your time and your courtesy.